This is Peter,
And this is Tom,
and you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcast.
now part of the Evergreen Podcast Network.
All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast. All right, Tom, I feel like this is a long time coming here.
Yeah, this is one we've been talking about, or you particularly have been talking about a long time. So we're going to talk about the man who's faced on the $100 bill, one of the country's founding fathers. So we're going to go over a little bit of brief history, look at some facts that might surprise you about the famous Ben Franklin.
I mean, this guy was everything. It's surreal because as we sat down to talk about this, I'm like, all right, we could do this in like 40 minutes. And you're like, no, this is like a multiple part. And I'm like, we're going to try our best. But he was a writer, a scientist, an inventor, a statesman, a diplomat, a printer, a publisher, a forger, political philosopher,
Inventor, scientist. Yeah, no, he was like basically, he was a Renaissance man, like that
Renaissance
term.
man. Yeah. Polymath is what kept on popping up when I was doing research for this. And I'm like, polymath? What is polymath? So I literally had to go in and like look it up, which stems from a Latin word, homo universalis, which basically means he was a universal human, an individual whose knowledge spans a substantial number of subjects, like known to draw on complex bodies of knowledge to solve specific problems. Like he was one of a kind.
Yeah, and he didn't have a really formal education. He only had 2 years of formal education, which I'm sure we'll get into. But one reason why he was able to do all these things was he made so much money. He was mostly with the printing press.
Yeah.
He made so much money doing that he was able to retire in his early 40s, and then just
42.
spent the next 42 years basically just doing whatever he wanted. The inventing, spent a lot of time in England. That's what got him into politics, and obviously everything with revolution and stuff. So, but yeah, one reason was because he became so wealthy from his writings and from his publishing companies that he was able to just do anything else he wanted. And he put a lot of that to public service.
Yep. Which we'll discuss. Yeah, he's like a first this. Like it's so many things that are first can be attributed.
He's going to have to be, especially for the United States, because he was alive and the country wasn't even a country. So he's going to be the first for a lot of things.
Well, okay, good point. However, he retired at 42. Most of the things we're talking about, we're going to obviously talk about his early life as well, but most of the stuff that you guys know him for happened after his retirement. It's almost like, I keep on thinking 42 he retired, right? I mean, that's like us retiring in a few years. I can't it's like starting a whole new life and then doing everything you were meant to do in your life after retirement, in retirement. Yeah, that's crazy to me.
It'd be nice.
Yeah, right. Okay, we're teachers. We're never retiring. Let's get going and let's kind of get started a little bit about his.
I guess where he was born. Yeah, right.
Yeah. That's what I was going to go.
We'll start there a little bit and move on. All right, you can go that. We'll talk a little bit about it and we'll see where it goes.
All right. So Benjamin Franklin, guys, was the 10th son of 17 children when he was born in 1706, Boston, Massachusetts. He eventually made Philadelphia his home base, and that's kind of what he's known for. But being the 10th son of 17 children at a time when really the firstborn was the most important child of them all kind of made him really the forgotten son. And he kind of talks about that in his autobiography as well. 1 year of grammar school and then another year under a private teacher, as Tom said, 2 years formal education. By the age of 10, at 12, he was basically done with schooling and he went to work for his brother James, who was a printer. And that's kind of what starts his printing, career.
He writes in his autobiography that he wants to be a sailor, but his father lost an older son to a sailing accident. Said, you're not doing that. He actually wanted to go into the clergy. But the problem was, to be in the clergy, you need many, many years of schooling, and he just couldn't afford. This was still before, public schooling or anything like that. He couldn't afford to send him to school that much. Like I said, he only had 2 years of formal schooling, so he had to go become an apprentice with his brother. And it wasn't like an easy time. You'd think they were brothers; they'd be nice to each other, and that really wasn't the case. You could say his brother used to beat him, savagely beat him and stuff like that, because Benjamin was getting more, I guess, praise and more success than him. So a lot of times he was jealous with that. So we'll talk about what he did there basically. But his brother did not want him there basically.
And during this time, this is also when Ben Franklin kind of starts to self-educate himself through reading. That's why, it's funny when
he loved to read. Yeah.
They tell, when we had kids, right, Tom, it was this idea of make sure you read to them, And this is the idea here, too, that Franklin just read newspapers. He just started reading newspapers, then transitioned into books. And he was always found reading and reading and reading. And what ends up happening is James Franklin, his brother, winds up finding a new newspaper called the New England Courant, 1721. And in this particular one, this is an interesting setup for the
Yeah, what
paper
he does.
because he allowed readers to contribute to his paper. That was like an open invitation
Yeah,
that readers
opinion pieces,
exactly.
which didn't exist before. And there were newspapers before this, but really it just kind of had information from news abroad. This one actually had articles about like what's going on around the area, had advertisements, had the news of like the ship schedules, and just became really, really popular. And then
Yeah,
the
and
opinion pieces were big.
exactly. So one old lady named Silence Dogood started writing for this opinion piece, and Silence Dogood actually was Benjamin Franklin,
Ben Franklin,
right?
yeah.
So the brother didn't even know that here is his younger brother, who's still like a teen. He wrote 14 essays where he basically made fun of like the old British traditions. He made fun of funeral eulogies. He made fun of students at Harvard. Made fun of pretentiousness.
He wrote about the rights for women, which was like a
Yeah,
big deal. This
yeah,
is
no,
early
nuts.
1700s.
Yep. And the brother, James Franklin, was convinced that there's no way, like, it didn't even cross his mind that this could have been Franklin because they're like, this had to be some really learned person with a lot of wit that could write these essays. But meanwhile, that was the beginning of Ben Franklin really stating his opinions. Then James gets in trouble in 1722
He
because
goes to
obviously,
jail. Yeah.
yeah, mainly because of his newspaper, right? The authorities were kind of upset that his newspaper was
It was making fun of the clergy.
exactly. So they say he is forbidden to print or publish the current. So he winds up actually giving the current to Ben Franklin because he
Yeah.
doesn't want to lose it. So he like
Yeah.
signs it off to his brother while he goes to jail.
Basically they were against inoculations at the time for
Yeah.
smallpox. That was
Mhm.
one of the things, and it was a big thing. And a lot of the other Puritan leaders said that they supported. They said it's making people sicker. He was also writing a lot about making fun of the clergy, particularly James was doing a lot of that. And Benjamin was left on the paper, and the paper was doing really well. Benjamin was doing really well with the paper, but he just when James got out, he just didn't like the direction he was taking it in,
Yeah.
and he just kept on harassing him about giving it back. And instead, he was still beating him at this time, like just randomly just
Yeah.
attacking him
Franklin
and
was
beating him.
17 at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Franklin's like, I'm done with this, and he just forget it. He runs away and leaves in 1723, which is a big risk because at that time, running away was actually a crime because you had to have some sort of place in society, and the idea was runaways didn't fit in anywhere. So by like running off, like he was taking a big risk that he could get thrown in jail for doing something like this or worse because you no longer fit in society. You're going to be like a drain in society now because you're not contributing in some way. But he left to New York in hopes of trying to be a printer. So he's
Right.
taking a risk. This is just another example of someone in history that takes this big risk and it pays off down the line. Not saying but sometimes they don't work out because it didn't work out for him in New York. But he walks across New Jersey and finally ends up in Philadelphia. And that's kind of where he starts to find his niche, basically.
But also like even escaping home at 17 today, like it's that
Oh,
I can't
it's not
imagine.
easy. Yeah, no, they're just to leave home. But again, he wasn't. He didn't have no connection with his like other family at that point. It was just his brother who just was like he felt like it was stifling him creativity. Plus, the guy's beating him.
Yeah.
Like it's like nope,
Yeah.
bye. So
So he winds up going to Philadelphia, and this is also where he first meets his future wife, Deborah.
yeah, yeah.
Which
Deborah Reed.
Deborah Reed, which he kind of promises marriage to, but then he winds up going to Europe and like abandons her, and then
Yeah,
she
it's
gets
pretty
married to
much.
somebody
You
else.
should marry someone else, and then other things happen. So I just picked this up, and I know this sounds like a dad joke, but you know how he said he liked to like further his education and read all the time. Look at her
Hmm.
last name.
Reed.
Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why. That's such a bad. I don't know.
Dude, that's perfect.
Just shows you where my mind is right now. But yeah, so
Anyway, he winds up, walking past the Reed family doorstep. He sees Deborah. They talk. They blah blah blah, and then eventually he
yeah,
starts rooming at the Reeds,
yeah,
right?
he rooms there. He lives there.
Yep. And eventually, again, starts. Yeah, he's still a teenager. Starts working as a printer, and by spring of 1724, he starts meeting other young men that are also really into reading and very eloquent and educated young men. Even though he's not, he's like self-educated, and he is kind of urged to set up a business for himself by the Reeds, but also by one of the Reeds' friends, who happens to be the governor of Pennsylvania,
Yeah,
Sir William Keith. And Sir William Keith suggests to Franklin that he should try to, return to Boston, raise enough money, capital, so that way he can start this venture of opening up his own printing business. Then he suggests that maybe he could go to England as well, make some
yeah.
connections in London with some stationers, some booksellers, and maybe choose his type and so on and so forth. So he tells Franklin, you know what, listen, I'll help you get money to go to England, and then I'll write all these letters of credit and introduction letters for you. So that way you have it easy when you get to England. So Here's basically Ben Franklin promises marriage to Deborah Reed. Then him and his friend James Ralph hop on a boat and they sail to London in November of 1724. But then they realize when they get there that Keith, the governor, never actually made or wrote
Yeah,
anything, rather.
he just reneged on the whole thing.
Yep. He was like, you guys are fine. So here now are these two teenagers in London
And they're
and
stranded, no money.
stranded, right? So he winds up so he does what he knows how to do. He basically gets a job at a printing press because that's what he does. Based on everything I read, this is where he like starts to really enjoy theater, and also this is where he kind of gets into his other pleasures. Where he's infamous for this. He was a big womanizer.
Yeah, he was a flirt, a womanizer. He actually had a child named William that we'll get to later on. And the
Yeah,
mother of William is not known. No one knows who the mother is. It's kind of like
yep,
a name that was kind of lost to history. I
yep.
couldn't really find out what was going on there. But he lived obviously in England for a number of years. He actually goes back to later on too. He was a big supporter of the crown, of the English monarchy, really up until around 1775.
Yeah,
Like
no,
he
they
was,
thought they were
yeah.
like
So
Americans were kind of like, is this guy a spy? Like they
you
were a
actually
little
thought, yeah.
reluctant.
Well, now you're getting ahead of our story here,
Oh,
Pete. Come
sorry,
on,
my
you're
bad, my bad.
breaking up the chronologically. Come
I
on,
got
man. We're in the
excited. He was a
1730s.
spy. I mean, that's the cool stuff. No, I'm just kidding. All
No,
right.
he wasn't. That's the point.
I know, I know, I
Now
know.
we're going to get in trouble for calling Benjamin Franklin a spy.
History teachers talking about
That's not going to go over very well.
Anyway, he's in London. He's doing his thing, right? He's just kind of living a self-indulgent life. He's hooking up with all these women. He's meeting all these other people in the printing business. He really is making connections. He really only wrote to Deborah once. He basically ignores Deborah, which is why
She,
Deborah
well, she,
winds up getting
well,
married to somebody else.
she gets married to someone else, but then that husband runs off, and then he actually marries her in 1730.
Yes. But when he comes,
So
that's later. When he comes back from London, but he also
yeah,
marries her already with a son. He's like, and here is a baby that happens
yeah.
to be my son from this woman. I will never tell you who she is.
Now raise it.
Yeah, literally. So anyway, Ben Franklin at that point decides, you know what? It's 1726. He decides he's done with London. He had enough, and he winds up coming back to Philadelphia. He starts this like letter exchange with Thomas Denham, who is a Quaker merchant, and he offers him like a clerkship in his store in Philadelphia, like come back, blah blah blah. So he comes back, but then Denham dies fairly quickly. So now here's Franklin, 20 years old, returning from the printing trade, right, and set up his own printing press, more or less. First as a partner, and then by 1730, he is the sole proprietor of his
Yeah,
own printing press.
it was someone else's press, but he was basically a better printer than the man that was
Yep,
doing it for. So he kind of takes the business over, and he starts becoming really big at the time. Like a lot of the
money,
citizens noticed
lots of
what's going on.
money.
Businessmen, yeah, he started getting contracts to do government jobs, and this business really started to thrive at this point.
And this is, as you mentioned, we said it just before, but this is also when he decides, he's like, I should be married. Like, because a lot of him, they said that he kept on hanging out with quote unquote low women. And because of how much money he started to make, it like didn't really match with his status anymore, that he
Yeah,
kept on like hooking up with all these different women. So he decided, like, I need a wife. So he goes back to Deborah and he goes, all right, let's get married. So he took her as a wife on September 1st, 1730. But at the same time, she was like the only woman in Philadelphia that would have him because of the fact that he had an
that he
illegitimate son.
legitimate son. Yeah, yeah. It wasn't the fact that she was in a marriage beforehand, the husband ran off. That was the only way to like, yeah, it was the only, their status. They had to just be together. That's how it
Yep.
had to work.
So it worked out. Yeah, she was left behind and he had a legitimate son. So they wind up having, first of all, as you mentioned, we don't know who the mother is, but they wind up having a son, Frankie, who dies at the age of 4. And then they have a daughter, Sarah, who winds up surviving them both. William never, ever gets along with Deborah. And he, as we know, his future, he's
We'll
kind
get
of
to that.
he's
Yeah.
kind of tied to our state. But
Yes.
all right, so let's go back to Franklin.
Well, he opens up the Pennsylvania Gazette, right? That's probably
Hmm.
like which is the
Claim to fame.
yeah. It printed the papers. It also contributed pieces under a lot of his aliases. So he had other aliases at this time too that he would print under, and became the most successful newspaper in all the colonies. So, and he actually has the first ever political cartoon in it, which Ben Franklin himself drew.
This guy did everything.
So what does that say? Yeah. He also at this time creates a organization known as Junto, right?
Yep.
Which was like a young man's work group that came together to come together these well-educated men, mostly businessmen, about like, civic improvement and stuff like that. He joins the Freemasons at that time. So he was a very successful man, very busy man socially. That's when he's put together and he starts making a lot of money with like his Poor Richard's Almanac.
and also the library company of Philadelphia. He basically finds the
Yeah,
library
library.
because of the
Again,
junto.
yeah, reading books he thought was very important. Yeah,
Yep.
hospitals. He founds hospitals, fire prevention, insurance companies. He's doing
fir-
all this stuff in
First
this town.
fire,
Yeah,
very first firehouse in Philadelphia. He's like, we need something in case there's a fire to like.
we
He
saw these
like,
fires were devastating back then. Yeah, like they were
yeah, it's
just
crazy.
there was no fire codes and stuff like that.
Forms the American Philosophical Society in 1743. In 1749, publishes proposal relating to the education of youth in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania rather. And then in 1751, because so he is through this junta where he basically brings together these like greatest minds in Philadelphia, and they discuss politics, natural philosophy, they exchange knowledge and business. These guys are like, well, we need access to books, so that's how in 31 they organized the first library, and all these minds getting together because he's kind of like the leader of it. A lot of this credit goes to him, and these guys really are the ones that push for first philosophical society and then push for better education. And in 1751, you have that is spearheaded by Ben Franklin of the Academy of Philadelphia, which we know today as the University of Pennsylvania. I mean, this guy is just using his wealth and his status to, I would say, move Philadelphia's society forward. No question about
Yeah,
it.
absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, he creates insurance companies to help against fire loss, and he's doing in his business too is also going really successful. So much so by we talked about before by 1749 he retired from business, and that's when he starts concentrating on like science and experiments and inventions and stuff like that. And he actually creates a heat efficient stove, this metal stove that uses less wood than traditional stoves to help
Yep.
like heat the house, and they call it the Franklin stove. And,
Hmm.
and he said, since it was invented to improve society, he refused to take out a patent on it because he could have made even more money doing that. By this point, he's already, I guess, like a millionaire by like today's equivalent, right? At this
Standards,
point,
yeah.
standards, right? So he's making a ton of money. He invents swim fins at this time.
It's
The
crazy.
swimming fins, right? The glass harmonica. There's a music instrument, bifocals. But during this time, he also gets really famous because of his study in the early 1750s when it comes to electricity, which I guess we can get into a little bit if you want. And
Yeah,
I'm sure
absolutely. Yeah.
that's
So,
one you'll be big
so
into.
just getting into electricity real quick, when he retired in 1748, 49, at the age of like 42, there was this distinctive status of the 18th century that basically no busy artisan could be a gentleman. So you need to be, when you're a gentleman, you cannot work. So from that point forward, he never worked again physically, right? He became a silent partner in the printing firm that he still owned, right? So he still made
He's
profit
making
like
money. Yeah,
crazy.
he's still making money.
Yeah, but he never actually he actually announced himself as a gentleman. And he did this by having a portrait painted of himself and acquired like a coat of arms, and he moved into the spacious house in the quiet part of town, and he's now officially a gentleman. Which is where he starts doing all these like, well, this is what gentlemen do. They play around and they have these amusements, and from this time is where you have a lot of these different what do you call it, inventions that he comes up with. But
Yeah.
also in 1740s, electricity was one of these like curious amusements for gentlemen. And there was an electrical machine sent to the library company in Philadelphia by one of Franklin's like English correspondents. He made sure was sent over. And in the winter of 1746-47, Franklin and three of his other gentleman friends began to like investigate this electrical phenomenon. So,
His son
um,
helps him too. William, his
yep,
first son,
yep.
does help him early. Does help him with these experiments. And so a lot of people say, "Oh, Franklin invented electricity." That's not true. You can't
No, no,
invent
no, no,
something
no.
that's existing. So he didn't invent it. What he's doing is he's trying to understand is lightning electricity, right? Because that's something that
Yep,
they weren't necessarily sure about how electricity flows and stuff like that. Because what's happening in a lot of these buildings is they're getting tall, particularly like churches and stuff, and they have metal on the top or weather vanes on the top. They're getting hit by lightning, and that's sparking fires. So he's
yep.
also looking at he creates the lightning rod from these experiments that redirects the lightning into the ground, high metal pole basically to make sure that the buildings don't get hit by lightning, which is like a huge. It saves structures and millions of dollars of
They still
property
use it
damage.
today.
It's a basic principle. Yeah,
Yeah.
lightning rods.
Actually, when he was done, so in 1751, his 86 page book titled Experiments and Observations on Electricity is published. And it winds up going through 5 different English
Yeah,
editions and 3
yeah.
French,
Makes him
1 Italian,
famous.
1 German. He is a world
Yeah,
known
international
scientist
fame.
now.
Yeah, he's known
Yeah,
as the man that tamed lightning
crazy.
from his kite experiments and so forth with lightning. So he becomes super famous from this. Yeah.
Yes, fame spreads.
And that fame is going to carry him into and help him in politics, which is his
Yep.
next main like thing he really gets into in the 1750s.
And once we get into politics, awesome segue. Real quick though, he invented a battery for storing electrical charges during those experiments with electricity. He also coined new English words for the new science of electricity, like conductor, that's him. Charge, discharge, condense, electrify, and there's many others are coined by Ben Franklin that we use today.
Yeah, so he's doing a lot.
So now that he's famous, he is rich, he's renowned. Let's get into public service of Ben Franklin.
All right, so he really gets into, like we said, the 1750s. He actually goes to in 1757. He goes to England, where where he's a representative from Pennsylvania. In its fights over the descendants of the Penn family over who should represent the colony, so he's kind of like going there. He actually remains in England until 1775, so he's there for a while. And he's also the colonial representative not only of Pennsylvania but also Georgia, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. So he's doing all this time. And when he's there, he considered himself a loyal Englishman, like we said before. He liked a lot of stuff that England had. The thinkers, the theater, the witty conversations, like stuff like that he felt was in like short supply. And during this time, he's married to Deborah, and he keeps on urging her to come and visit him. And she's like no, because she doesn't trust traveling by ship. And he actually is considering in the 1760s of just staying there permanently, just living in England from then on. But things start to change a little bit in 1765, where he gets caught up in with the Stamp Act that comes out, right?
Yes.
I'm sure everyone knows about the Stamp Act. And he actually is the one that persuades the English Parliament, or he's giving reasons why, and one of the individuals to help persuade English Parliament to repeal the law.
Yep.
But he starts seeing a lot of the corruption in English politics that he's kind of getting sick of too at this time.
And we also need to mention, because that's what brings him back, he's appointed during this time, the Crown appoints him as the Postmaster General.
Yeah.
Back in the colonies. And this is interesting too, because by being the Postmaster General of the colonies, initially it's just of the region like Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but eventually he's the main general, Postmaster General, which kind of brings him into this uniting factor of all the colonies. Now he's actually interested, because he has to through his job. He has to get to know people from various colonies. He has to there's some unity involved here, right? Again, they're just colonies. There's 13 of them. But because he's the Postmaster General for all of them, he starts to see them not just as individual colonies, but like as an entity almost, per se.
Yeah, he actually thought the colonies should unite in some way, even way before there was any sort of talk of revolution.
Yeah.
Even in the 1750s, he talks about how the colonies should unite together. That's that famous "Join or Die." Snake, that was his political cartoon. That's not a revolution cartoon. That's more like we need to join together just as a
French and Indian War.
This was during the French anyway. War. Yeah, so that was a lot of times you see that with the revolution. It definitely can carry that too, but that's drawn way before that.
Yep. Often my students mistake that. They're like, "Oh yeah, this is 20 years prior. This is French Revolutions. French and Indian War is happening." And Ben Franklin's like, "We should all join together and have a say as one." And he was, by the way,
force as one. Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, we both know he was repealed. The people were like, "No." Colonies were like, "We don't want to do this.
We don't want to do that." Yeah. No, you mean the states don't get along with each other? No way. No way. Bipartisanship in the United States? No way.
So in 1762. Well, a lot of things happened in 1760. So very much a royalist by 1762. But as you mentioned, he starts seeing the cracks. He's like, and this is an interesting thing. When you start reading the writings of Ben Franklin, he still wants to be British. When he's pro-American independence, that's because he says that Britain lost its way. And his belief was that the American colonies actually retained what was awesome about being British.
Yeah. They're the only true British stuff.
Exactly.
British
They're
left,
the true
basically.
Brits. Yep.
So,
but in 1762, his son William, then age 31, is appointed the Royal Governor of New Jersey. Royal Governor meaning British selected Royal Governor of New Jersey. So William is definitely a loyalist of our home state, and they're still kind of somewhat get along. It's not that bad yet. So in 1762, Franklin has to go back to Pennsylvania to really look after his post office, but he does promise his friends that he would soon return, right? So,
which he does not.
And he has to tour the post office up and down North America. So you're looking at 1,800 miles, and there's no, roads really. He has to
no
deal
roads,
with uprisings.
they don't have that sort of stuff.
No, he has to travel to all the post offices, and he winds up losing an election to the Pennsylvania Assembly in 1764. And at that point, Franklin just He wants to go back to London. Deborah's like, I don't want you to go back to London. He's like, well, you know what? I got to go because this is where the Stamp Act really gets involved in 1765. He's like, I need to go back and face the problems of the Stamp Act. And I feel like I'm the right person to bring that up in the parliament.
So, like you said, Pete, and then Franklin gets back to England. He kind of gets a big break, or what's looked at as a big break later on, with something that becomes known as the Hutchinson Affair. So there was this English-appointed governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, and he pretended to take the side of the people in Massachusetts in their complaints against England, but he was still really working for the King of England. And Franklin got a hold of a lot of these letters in which Hutchinson called for an abridgment of what the English call of English liberties in America. And Franklin sends these letters to America, and kind of like these hidden documents, right? And a lot of this, the population got like outraged, and the leaking the letters, Franklin was actually called to the English foreign ministry, and he was condemned in public. And this really, this combined with the Stamp Act is really what kind of makes him change his minds a lot about, like we said before, about what was going on in England, that the English government and stuff lost its way. And that really is when he does come home, and that's when he starts working actively for independence. This is when he believes, right, he's going to support this cause of independence because of the Hudson Affair, Stamp Act, things of that nature.
Yep. Yeah. So he returns. He sails for America. Like you said, he feels embarrassed. He feels like England
Yeah,
just accusing him
turned
of
it back
things
on.
while
Yeah,
when he was
yeah,
such a good son of England. So he's like, forget this. Sails for America in March 1775. Upon his arrival, immediately is selected to the Second Continental Congress. For those of you guys, we did an American Revolution podcast. You guys can find it. So some Americans definitely remain suspicious of his loyalties because this guy
yeah,
is so British-esque, but because he was abroad for so long, right? So there was some talk like, is he a British spy? Is he not a British spy? But it didn't matter. He was one of the most known Americans in the world,
yeah. They had to be on
and
it. Yeah,
yeah, and they needed Americans to or American cause to be known around the world. So that's actually why they asked him to join the Continental Congress,
yeah,
because in
yeah.
1776 they're like, now go back to Europe, my friend.
Yeah, he was so important. He was put on the Committee of Five to help draft the Declaration of Independence. He didn't actually write much of it. There was talk of it. I think he suspected he was going to write more than he did, but he was considered like a jokester and stuff like that. Most of it was
Yeah,
obviously written by Jefferson. A lot of the idea, a lot of the contribution, obviously, was Franklin. Franklin does sign it.
yeah,
And it's during this time too that he thinks his son William is going to be supporting this. I talked about a little bit before. This is the royal governor of New Jersey, but he doesn't agree with his views, and he remains a loyal Englishman, a loyal Tory, and actually serves 2 years in a prison during the Revolution. And when he's let out, returns back to England. Does never really talks to his father again.
yeah. That's
Writes
kind
him
of a
out.
sad story, right?
Yeah, Ben writes him out of his will and says, "Listen, you tried to take everything from me. I'm leaving nothing to him." Like that's what he says,
Nuts.
more or less. Now they were supposed to be very
Also,
close for a while too.
yeah. Well, yeah, one became a patriot, one remained a Tory.
Yeah, we'll see how
And
it splits them
we
out. Yeah.
should say Deborah died too. Deborah winds up
Yeah,
dying around this time when he goes to England and he gets like banished from England, more or less.
yeah,
That's when
she died a
Deborah
few
dies.
years later, so that's why when he goes to, well, you mentioned a little bit before, so he signed Declaration of Independence, and then afterwards he sent as the colony's ambassador because he's so famous to France,
Yep.
and
To
the
beg
ambassador
for help.
court of Louis XVI, and because his wife is dead, he's a notorious flirt there, and he is loved in France. Franklin is a celebrity among celebrities in France. He is the American when it comes to when in France, and they love him. And that's one reason why they signed the Treaty of Alliance with the Americans in 1778 is because of that.
There's when he goes to France, right? His image as like this wild American. They have him in
Yeah,
like
he's
this like
everywhere.
coon hat, right? Like
Yeah, he's everywhere.
wilderness.
Yeah,
His face appears on medallions, candy boxes, rings, statues, prints. Like women did their hair in like the Franklin way. Like it was what? Like what does this even mean? But what he also did, even though he was super wealthy, he played that up and he dressed in a simple brown and white linen suit and wore this fur cap, no wig, and no sword.
yeah.
Because that,
He was fitting the part.
yeah, he's like, if that's what they want me to see as this rugged American, like that's what I'm gonna do. He's in like the most formal, elaborate court of Versailles in all of
Yeah,
Europe, and he's kind of dressed like just like business casual, business casual for the time.
and he spends the Revolution there. Like that's where he is
Yep.
during the time of the Revolution, and he actually signs. He's on hand to sign the Treaty of Paris in 1783. That after the Americans won the Revolution, so that's what he's doing the whole time. He's negotiating, getting more money, basically being the ambassador to France, getting all that French support for the American Revolution, which, let's be honest, the American Revolution isn't successful without French support. So
Yeah. Also, this is again we keep on talking about him like being a player and like getting around with all these women. Like he's an older
he's an
dude.
old man. Yeah, he's in his 70s. Like,
Yeah, he's a 70-year-old dude, and he's like
yeah.
hooking up with like 40-year-old women. This is nuts, especially for the time. A lot of pain for him. Gout and kidney stones apparently was like a big issue for him.
Well,
So he was continuously in pain.
he was overweight.
Yeah. They're also saying that he was surrounded by spies, like had to watch what he said, where he said, because he was a known figure. I mean, no question about it. He was the guy that people wanted to bring down, you might say. But he does secure the military and diplomatic alliance of France in 1778, which helps us win, as you said, our American Revolution.
Yeah, so revolution is won. Now he's in his late 70s. He comes back to America,
Yep.
and there's a little bit of debate because apparently there's 100,000 what is that, 100,000 pounds in congressional funds missing.
Yeah.
And he basically just kind of gives a biblical quote saying, "Muzzle not the ox that threaded out his master's grain." And everyone kind of laughs and just like, okay, basically he spent all the money. He spent that money on God knows what. And he's like, yeah, well, what are you going to do about it? And then everyone's like, yeah, okay, fine. It's Ben Franklin. Let it happen. So it kind of just got kind of awesome. And then the missing funds were never again mentioned again. And he winds up getting put on he was unanimously selected in 1785 as the 6th president of the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania. All right. So he's basically holding these types of offices and stuff like that. And that's what he's doing. Like he is a member of the Congress, but he's more of a kind of a figurehead, right? From what I saw, like he's not.
Yeah,
really,
no,
he's
people say
he's
that
not,
he came.
he's not in the best of health at this time.
No.
He's in his
They
70s.
said
He's in his 70s.
Yeah. And for then, in the 70s, back then,
That's a
like
big thing, yeah.
you were in bonus years, man. Like
Yeah.
you shouldn't be alive. People say that, and even he said it, he's coming back to America to die. Like as sad as that sounds. Most of his friends were either in Britain or France. Like this, he was more European really than American.
Than American, yeah. He spent the revolution in France. Like you think of the other founding fathers, they're here like fighting. They're some doing. I know Adams was doing a little bit of stuff, and like the Netherlands, like doing those sorts of things. But they did come back. But I think of like Washington, Jefferson, and all those other guys, like they were actually on the front lines in some cases. But he was in France and doing his own, getting funds and stuff, but also having some fun as we talked about.
Also, Congress didn't really treat him that well when he came back. At one point, he asked for a diplomatic appointment for his grandson, and Congress was like, no. He requested some land in the West, and Congress was like, no. Like they were kind of just. It's almost like the love for Ben Franklin was dying out right before his death. What he kind of stuck it to Congress too, because just before his death in 1790, he retaliated by signing this memorial requesting that Congress abolish slavery in the United States.
Yeah, that was big.
And this is a very famous essay by Ben Franklin that he kind of attached to it. It provoked a lot of Congress. Yeah, anti-slavery. He was like, you know what? I'm an abolitionist. And it's provoked some congressmen into angry defense of slavery. Then Franklin mocked them that you're defending slavery. How can you defend slavery?
Yeah, he thought it went against the newly formed Constitution. That's things we didn't talk about. He did serve as host of the Constitutional Convention in 1777 in Philadelphia, but he really didn't have much to do it. Really, what he would do, if you really read about it, is it was really hot, obviously. So he was mostly outside naked most of the time, getting fanned by his by people, because that's what it was. You could see Ben Franklin outside of the Philadelphia Constitutional Hall, like naked, because it was so hot. Like that's what he did, and they were like, "Oh man, here comes Ben again." Yeah, they carried him there. Like, he was more of a figurehead, but he was there. He didn't really. He engaged in a little bit of a debate, I believe, but very little, not as much as history. If you watch some of those, like documentaries,
John Adams movies or whatever.
Yeah, like he wasn't really there quite that much. Doing that much, because it wasn't for him. He was done with that, and then he writes in 1789 about the anti-slavery, which is a big. That he frees his slaves, and he actually leaves in his will that his children cannot collect their inheritance until they free their slaves.
Yep, and he freed his slaves really early. Actually, he initially, when he retired in 42, he had slaves.
He only had
and then
two.
He frees them. Yeah, he had 2 slaves when he was 42 years old, and then almost right away he winds up freeing them. And for most of his adult life, he doesn't have slaves. So it's not like he's like, oh, when I die, kind of like what Washington did. No, he did not have slaves for most of his adult life. And this is this essay that winds up mocked this idea of that America being okay with slavery. This newspaper piece winds up being published only a month before he dies. It's like his last legacy is as an abolitionist, which I think really adds also to his overall legacy.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, no, when he was going to the Constitutional Convention, he couldn't really walk because of his weight and gout and other issues. So they made this like carrying little hut thingy that they carried
Yeah,
him in.
carrying around. Yeah, and remember, this is in July, hot Philadelphia. You had to keep the windows closed and everything because
The
they didn't want people to
secrecy
know what was
aspect.
going on, secrecy of it. And here's Franklin just walking around or being wheeled around naked, trying to stay cool. It's
Nuts.
just nuts, crazy, interesting, but
Ben
nuts.
Franklin. What do you want? What do you want to get into? You want to get into some facts? You want to
Let's talk about his death.
finish up how he
So
died? Yeah, let's
he
do
winds
that.
up dying basically like a heart attack, more or less, right? April 17th, 1790. His daughter's there with him and stuff like that. She reportedly, some of his last words were, "A dying man can do nothing easily," because his daughter says, "Why don't you like try moving on your side?" Basically, all his organs were shutting down, and his lungs
Yeah.
just burst in his chest, and he was like coughing up his lungs and mucus and everything else like that. Then slowly, his breathing got irregular, and he died around 11 o'clock at night. And 84 years old, right?
Which is
Um,
surreal for that time.
yeah, for that time. Even now, 84 is, you could say they had a good run,
Yeah.
About 20,000 people attend his funeral, they're saying, at the Christ Church burial ground in Philadelphia. Revolutionary France entered a state of mourning for 3 days, because remember, he was still so famous and stuff in France at the time. So it becomes a huge event, his passing. On his grave is still there in Philadelphia, and it simply reads Benjamin and Deborah Franklin.
I
That's it.
have I've seen his grave.
Oh, yeah. It's there. I've been there.
Yeah, I've been there too. It's one of those things you have to do when you're in Philadelphia.
It has like it's not anything you would expect it to be. It's not like a
It's in a
monument.
corner. It's like in a corner, regular
Of a
grave in a
church,
corner.
yeah, and it's just like a fence around it. It's not like the Washington Monument, right? Lincoln Memorial,
Yeah.
things like that. Like he's a founding father, but it's a very small little thing, which is probably what he would have wanted because he was supposed to be a civil service man of the people type of role,
I'm just this guy did so much.
Well, that's why he's
Daylight savings time. That's one of his too. Like,
yeah, I don't like that, but
no, I know, but
he
like he suggested that. Like, there's
yeah,
so
I
much.
know. Some almanac. Well, he did a lot. Look, that's why he's on the $100 bill, right?
Yeah, it's all
That's
about
why
the
he's on
Benjamins.
$100. That's why he's on the $100 bill. He's one of the few people that were never president, right, to be on the bill. So
It's funny
very
when like
unfortunate.
you see those videos on the internet sometimes where they like make fun of people not knowing too much about American history, and they're like, "Who's your favorite president?" They're like Ben Franklin. You're
Oh
like,
yeah, I know. That's what I tell them too. I remember telling students, and they're like, "I'm like, no, Ben Franklin was never president." They're like, "Why are you always lying to us? Why?" I'm like, "I'm not like look it up. He was never president. He didn't even consider running. Like he was in his 70s. He wasn't going to be
he
president,
was he was an
you know."
older dude by then.
But I think a lot of them don't realize that how old he was compared to like everybody else. But yeah, but he did a lot. Like we said, he was actually a vegetarian. I guess we can get into the fun
Yeah,
facts, right? He obviously from him, he loved his carbs. He ate potatoes, rice, and bread mostly. He did eat some fish later on because the doctor said he needed to, but that didn't help his condition, obviously.
yeah, yeah. Lived according to 13 virtues that he came up with
Yes,
when he was
yes,
20
he
years
was.
old. Like some of them, I'm not going to get into it, but it was like temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, moderation.
Yeah,
Um,
he did not do that
yeah, like it's almost like he didn't follow his 13 virtues.
when
Um,
they were convenient for him. When they were convenient for him.
indeed.
But I thought one that was cool that I saw was that he's the only person in history to sign all four documents that helped create the United States. He signed the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Alliance and Commerce with France, the Treaty of Paris between England, France, the United States, and the U.S. Constitution. That's got to be like a Jeopardy question, I'm sure,
That's got to be
somewhere.
a Jeopardy question.
You know?
Also, an avid chess player.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent that he actually wrote essays on chess. He was known as the guy to beat, apparently. Franklin was inducted into the United States Chess Hall of Fame in 1999.
Well, yeah, in 1968, he was inducted into the Swimming Hall of Fame because he invented the fins and stuff like that because he loves swimming.
I can't. There's just so much. I can't. Well, besides like the $100 bill, you have stamps. He was first time he was really on anything U.S. government paper wise. It was 1861 stamp, then 1895 stamp, and then eventually winds up being on a $100 bill. Well, a lot of it we can't touch upon. I mean, he spent
We
half
talked
his
about,
life as a
yeah,
retirement.
they're saying that he did experiments with what led to the discovery of the Gulf Stream, with a lot of his oceanography work and things of that nature. So he's doing a lot of things. He works with the Treasury. Yeah, we talked about the bifocals,
Well, you
the
talked about
urine
like the glass harmonica.
yeah, it
We
was
talked,
big, right? Yeah, the Franklin stove lightning rod, the catheter. He created that to help with kidney stones.
yeah, because he suffered from those. Actually, his glass harmonica winds up being a musical instrument that is used by Mozart and Beethoven. He invented it, and those two guys kind of known, so they're using it. Didn't he create something with the alphabet?
Well, he wanted to create a new. He thought certain letters were redundant,
Yeah,
right?
he
That's
wanted like a
certain.
natural order.
So he went natural order of letters, and he wanted to get rid of certain letters. Um, and never really caught on. Like he wanted to get rid of certain letters. I think like C and J. It was C, J, Q, W, X, and Y. He wanted to get rid of. He wanted to add 6 new letters. Then they were designed to represent um, own specific vocal sounds. But he wrote an essay about it in 1779, but he scrapped it because like no one really cared. They're like, you know, it just didn't really catch on. But yeah, if he had his way, those letters would not be in the alphabet. He said they were redundant.
Did you see this thing about leaving money for Boston and Philadelphia?
Yeah, so he left, I think, like 2,000
Pounds.
silver, in pure silver.
Yeah.
And he said it couldn't be used. We had to wait 100 years, and it could only be used to help local artisans.
Yeah.
And then wait another 100 years, and it could be used any way you wanted. And they both spent, I think, the interest with it, right, and what it was over
Yep.
$4
By
million and $2 million.
1990.
Yeah, $4 million, $2 million. They used it to open up some scholarships in his name, and also open up the Franklin Institutes, Science Institute.
Is it crazy? The guy leaves money to his hometown, and says like,
Yeah.
let this accumulate in interest, and in 100 years you could spend it to help people. Like, nuts. It was 4.5 million. It's just crazy by 1990. In today's day and age, unfortunately, that's not like the biggest sum, which is so sad. That 4.5 million is not, anything really to boast about. It's not like they could build massive buildings with that, but
I'll
still,
take it. Could have left it to me.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think we'll take it. Early retirement for teachers. Well, I think that. I mean, I have nothing else. Anything else?
Yeah, I think he did a lot. I think like the idea of him being a Renaissance man would be interesting. Apparently, I did see that in the play Hamilton, there was a song that was supposed to be that was cut. That was Benjamin Franklin singing it, and he had some curses in it, and they're saying they wound up leaving it out, but some people saw that was actually a mistake leaving it out because it kind of fit the character of Franklin. I don't know. That's kind of interesting, I think. But he is a Renaissance man. Like that phrase, that term, if you're going to apply that to anyone in history, it's got to be Ben Franklin.
I mean, awesome. And I feel like he's so recognizable. You see a picture, you're like, Ben Franklin.
Yeah, they know who that is. Yeah, he's probably just as recognizable as any of the other founding fathers, if not more so. Yeah. Definitely the most recognizable of all of them that never became president.
Yeah. Well, I think that pretty much concludes our podcast on Ben Franklin. We did it. Yay.
There you go.
Well, if you guys want to find us, you can always find us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. If you want to email us, you could also email us. Our email is right on there. If you want to follow us, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, as well as Instagram. Just reach out, click that subscribe button wherever you guys listen to this podcast. And do not forget to leave us a review. We really do appreciate those. So thank you so much, guys. And until next week.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.